Jane Ghetto. Klar, Menschen haben hin und her, jeder Mensch sein Begehr, wird von Geurl getrieben, nur wo je kommt heraus der Fuhr, hat schon Leben als getan, hast gejogt sich noch der Sohn und in Heuschig verblieben.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Radiant Others Klezmer podcast. My name is Dan Blacksburg. I'm a klezmer trombonist, composer, educator, and I also do a lot of other kinds of music, recording this from my basement in West Philadelphia. We're back here with another conversation between me and some folks who make up our big klezmer and Yiddish world. This podcast is here to get you both informed and inspired to feel both the deep connection and love that all these folks have for Yiddish music, Yiddish culture, or whatever part of the Jewish music world that we find ourselves in, and feel that this is a world that you too could join in on, adding your voice musically or otherwise. Today, I'm really pleased to share this conversation with you that continues our series that we started about dealing with music from archives. A couple episodes ago, we talked to the musicians Susie Evans and Sylvia Chiranko about working on music from the KMDMP archive that folks from the Klezmer Institute and a lot of really wonderful people in our community have been putting a ton of work into bringing these old tunes from these manuscript collections out into the present day. Today, I'm talking with artist Zisl Slepovitch and archivist Stephen Naron about their work on another archive, the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies, a really large-scale video archive of many, many individual testimonies from Holocaust survivors that started in the late 70s and continued for a long time after that. This is an archive of 12,000 hours of video testimony that includes people's lives, people's stories, and a lot of poetry and songs that were part of people's experience, whether it was a song that gave them hope, a song that gave them courage, a song that just was part of their life. They shared these, and these songs are songs that Zisl and his ensemble, which features a lot of great musicians, including Sasha Lurie, have been releasing as albums, songs from testimonies. They've released 3 albums of all material drawn from these video testimonies, songs that they found, and you'll hear the deep and serious work that goes into figuring out how to bring these songs from these people's experience to us in the present moment as a performance, as a recording or something that you would play in a concert, and all the different ways that Zisl as an artist and Stephen as the archivist navigate that. I'm not kidding when I tell you that this is serious, heavy work. And I'm so glad that we got to talk about it and let this process kind of breathe in a conversation of our own. One thing about our conversation that I wish I could share with you is that when we were on Zoom recording this and talking with each other and all the different places the conversation wound itself, I found myself just nodding along, and I saw Zisl and Stephen just nodding along with things that each other said, and just how many different perspectives we all bring to this conversation, but how many places of connection and mutual understanding and appreciation this brought out for all of us. So it's my pleasure to share this conversation with you. Before we do that, I want to once again ask you for your help and support. We do this podcast as an offering to our big community, our big, dear, and amazing and diverse and vibrant community of people who choose to come together over our shared love of Yiddish culture, Yiddishkeit, klezmer music, and all the rest of the things that leads us to. And one way you can support us is by donating through our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Radiant Others, where you can just give us some money and help us make these episodes, and hopefully, as we were able to raise more support, more episodes. Right now we're getting one a month, and we're really proud of that, and we'd love to even do more if we could. So that's the Patreon. You can also always share this, tell people about it, and that's it for me. I'll let the episode do the rest of the talking. So here's my conversation with Zisl Slepovitch, Stephen Naron, about songs from Testimonies, music from the Fortunoff video archive for Holocaust testimonies.
Weil mir seinen die Schottens, was die Nacht hat zerspreit, nur sie eine versteht, wohin jeder geht, wer zum Leben versteht. Nur sie eine versteht, wohin jeder geht, wer zum Leben versteht.
All right, I am here with my friend Zisl Slepovitch and my new friend Stephen Naron, and we are here to talk about the songs from Testimonies from the Fortunoff archive, and also, of course, because this is Radiant Others, whatever other topics we get into. So, Zisl and Stephen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that, certainly, Stephen, you'll be new to people, but I think Zisl, you're a man of many talents and many activities, and I think that it would be great even just to take a moment for each of you to introduce yourselves and sort of what you do, and then we'll get into, who you are together. So, Zisl, hit us up first. What do you want people to know about you if they maybe don't know enough?
Well, as a lot of modern musicians or just modern working professionals, I have to wear many hats, as you have justly stated, and it's nothing like 50, 60 years ago. People would have one role on Broadway for a decade, and that would be their biography on this resume. No, we have to learn to do different things, and it also brings variety and fun and meaning and colors into life to be doing different things. So I'm a musician. I started as a pianist. I'm a musicologist. I have a PhD in musicology from my alma mater, Belarusian State Academy of Music in Minsk. That's right. I immigrated to the United States in 2008 when I was about 30, a couple of years after I got my PhD. And I'm a woodwind player. I started on clarinet and I expanded into other various woodwinds. So keyboard player, including organ and harpsichord, and conductor, music director, vocal coach. I work a lot with singers. I love working with singers. Actually, one of my dreams was to become an opera singer, but I had this irrational, or maybe actually rational fear of losing my only instrument. What do I do then? And it's kind of a foolish fear, but also not. But I ended up not being an opera singer, but actually working with a lot of singers in different settings, from synagogue to opera to different vocal projects, including this project, Songs from Testimonies, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's what I do. And I do Yiddish, and I do Jewish culture, Jewish studies. That's another big cross-section of my life, which happily married to my musical passion at a rather early age. So I studied with my late professor, Dr. Nina Stepanskaya, under whose supervision I defended my PhD dissertation in Minsk. And we've done a fair share of research, both field research, field trips all over Belarus and some Lithuania, some Ukraine, and archival research in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, not Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland. And so going into Jewish culture and Judaism was a totally new thing for me, having grown up in the Soviet Union and being completely cut off Jewish religion. Culture was kind of very, very minimal in a way, but also it was a lot. I mean, I can talk about that separately. I don't want to take away our time now, but I learned a whole lot while being an adolescent, and I started from there on incorporating that new knowledge and new discoveries into my professional work. So becoming kind of professional musical Jew, I guess.
Yep, I know about that.
Right? Who does that? So that's kind of, in brief, and having immigrated here into the United States, having started from scratch, I had no connections. And I knew very few people, including you. Then I met you and my future wife, Mariana, at Class Canada just a few years before that, and
Right.
that's when I moved. So I was very lucky to start my multi-year collaboration with the National Yiddish Theater Volksbühne, working with Zalman Mlotek and Montel Didner and the entire team in many, many different roles. And that has been a very happy journey, I must say, where I also learned was my another higher education there, musical theater, and I went on from there. And working, establishing my own klezmer band, Litvakus, with which we still play, and other collectives, other groups. And so just to come to the point today, arriving at Fortunoff Video Archive when my dear friend Annette Ezekiel Kogan, the leader of the Golem Jewish punk rock band, connected me with Steven, saying that some of the Fortunoff archive needs a composer or whatever musician to do something that she felt she could not do, was not qualified to do, although she's a wonderful musician and performer. And I reached out to Stephen and we talked, and then I kind of realized step by step that this is, as they say in Yiddish, a zivik from the Himmel. It's a marriage from heaven, because it kind of hits all the spots in Jewish studies, in ethnomusicological research, in music production, in music performance, in klezmer, in this, and languages, which is my passion. I come from linguists family, and it just kind of was very, very happy coincidence, that cross section of all parts of my life. So just to open this, I'm extremely grateful and happy to be doing this project, just aside from its meaning and everything else that we're going to talk about.
That's wonderful. And I think, like you said, I met you before you moved to New York. And I think one of the things that's been really a pleasure for me to watch in your development, and it's so weird to say that because we're roughly the same age, but it's so funny because our backgrounds are very, very different. And yet, one of the things that's been a pleasure for me is watching you with all of your knowledge and as an academic, as a performer, as a researcher, crash into the needs and the structures of being a professional New York musician, and watching you navigate that. And I think come out on top, I hope. I mean, obviously, work is one thing and finances are another, but, you found your places and figured out how to make a name and a space for yourself and connect it back to, and not have to give up who you were, which is, I think, actually really that's a real victory. And at the same time, I think one of the things I just want to draw out from your story is people really often assume, of probably both of us, a much larger amount of Jewish and Jewish cultural and historical literacy from a much earlier age than we actually had it. I mean, I grew up going to American mainstream conservative synagogue, mainstream-ish, but that's not important for right now. But that's all I had. I didn't have any of this klezmer. People were like, well, you've been playing klezmer since you were a baby. I'm like, no, I haven't. I was 19, And just to say, even you as somebody, people are like, well, you're from so-and-so and you did this and this. It's like, we chose this. We chose to be these people. We took this was new information. It resonated with us in a certain way. And then we chose to digest it to the level that we have so that we can be who we are now. But it's not something that we were born with, and even from our remarkable, our very different geographic and otherwise backgrounds, I think that's true for both of us. And I don't know if that's true for you, Stephen, but tell us about yourself and how you came to where you are in this Jewish culture exploration.
Yeah, well, yeah. How does one follow Zisl? Yeah, I'm sort of the odd person out here as a non-musician, really. But I'm an archivist, and I've been working at the Fortunoff Video Archive now on and off for 20 years. So I have a very a deep connection to this particular collection. It's been where I've spent most of my professional career. And so I've been working as director now since 2015. And one of my goals has been, since I started working as a director, is to try and find innovative but respectful, meaningful ways to engage with this collection and bring it outside of the archive, bring it beyond the sort of walls of the archive. And personally, if you want a little bit of more background, I grew up in Kansas City, born in Kansas City, Missouri. So I grew up in the burbs, Kansas City, and conservative Jewish family as well. So I also came late to the study of Jewish history and Jewish culture, but it was always there in the background. Like Zisl, languages have also been a big sort of driving factor as far as my interest in Jewish culture has gone, studying Hebrew and Yiddish and German and studying German Jewish history. But I always knew I wanted to work with archival materials, at least since I started working in libraries and archives as a college student and a graduate student. And so I was drawn to the sort of traces of Jewish culture that were left in these archives. And at the Video Archive, which was certainly a step in a new direction for me as an archivist who had never worked with audiovisual materials before, working with this medium, this audiovisual medium, was kind of a revelation to see just how moving and powerful these documents can be. And so the connection to Zisl really emerges through what I would say, ironically, is some pretty traditional forms of scholarship with archival sources, right? So we had a fellow who was part of our fellowship program, our first fellow at the archive, which is an initiative that I started after taking over as director. And this fellow, Sarah Garabova, was working with a testimony in the collection of a woman from Zvenygorodka, Ukraine. And again, this is very sort of close reading, close listening, working with these sources, triangulating information and facts, and putting together a story through this source. And in this incredible source was a series of songs and poetry that's recounted by Lubov in this testimony. And at the time, this was just one facet of an already amazing and fascinating audiovisual document. But Sarah pointed this out to us, and we started to dig deeper. And we realized that the songs that are presented, the poetry that she reads, these are works that don't exist anywhere else, as far as we can tell, right? And here again is the sort of power of this needle in an archival haystack that can be discovered when people spend time with these vast archival collections. In the Fortunoff Video Archive, just for a little bit of background for the people who don't know what it is, Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies is, I mean, we're talking about 12,000 hours of recorded material. So video testimonies, over 4,500 video testimonies of survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust. So it's an enormous collection, and that consists of something like 20 different languages, right? These were recorded in the United States, in South America, and in Canada and Israel, across Europe. And so it's a very diverse collection of materials, but again, it's just vast. And so many of these testimonies haven't been viewed since they were recorded or cataloged, right? So it's just an enormous resource waiting to be used by the scholars and educators of today and in the future. And so when Sarah came across this testimony in these songs, we sort of had a brainstorm where, wouldn't it be nice to hear this song or this piece performed again? These songs were written collectively by the prisoners of a small labor camp in Zvenygorodka, Ukraine. And many of these fellow prisoners probably didn't make it out alive, didn't survive, but Lubov did. And so Lubov might be the only living memory of these songs. So to see them performed again today would be, in our opinion, a sort of profound act of commemoration and solidarity with both Lubov and the prisoners who didn't survive. And so that's, as Zisl pointed out, that's when we connected with Zisl through this common link. Actually, it was Mark Oppenheimer, who was at the time was a professor at Yale, who was also he was the one of the members of the Unorthodox podcast, and I knew him from campus and New Haven, and I asked him if he had any ideas, and he put me in touch with the Golem folks, who then passed me on to Zisl. And of course, Zisl is the ideal person for this type of work. Not only has an innate sense and understanding of historical and ethnomusicological research, but he's conducted his own oral histories around Jewish culture and Jewish music. His fluency in a number of different languages really made it a perfect fit for working with this very diverse collection. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about the actual songs and the different languages and different cultures that are represented in these 3 volumes that we've now done together as a team. But that sort of gives you a little background as to who I am, my work, and what the video archive is, and how this all began.
Yeah. So we've got a sense of what the archive is. We got a sense of how you two came together, what the goals were around this. And I love that story about realizing what these songs were and what they could be. And then, I actually literally have written down, how does it fit in with your own personal and artistic ideas? And Zisl, you were just saying about how, and both of you are saying about how perfect a match is for all the different things that you do and that you're interested in. Like, how cool is that?
It was really cool. Actually, I arrived at this project with a kind of similar program of my own that I named, maybe it was not the most inventive name, Traveling the Yiddish Land. And that was based on my and Nina Stepanska's expeditions or field footage, which I was just already living in the United States, and I was on tour in Europe, and it just struck me like I have to do something with it beside just publishing some scholarly papers, academic papers. When I also realized that I'm kind of falling out, not kind of, but really falling out of academia, not having immigrated to the United States and tried to apply to multiple academic jobs in the midst of recession in 2008 and a little bit later. That was kind of a feat. So I realized, okay, I'm a performer now. I'm composer, producer, whatever. I have to do something with this material. It's my responsibility. After all, for these people, most of whom, or maybe all of whom, have passed away at this point, and my professor, who was my research partner, and it's my debt before all these people and this culture. So and also on another plane, it's a bit of that is what a lot of us in the revivalist movements, not just Jewish, but in general, there are multiple revivalist movements in the world, from the classical music, the historically informed performance, from Renaissance and Baroque music, and different ethnic cultures, and so on and so forth. That's what we're doing. We're giving voices to the people, composers, performers, cultures that don't have that voice anymore, and they need to be researched and presented today. And that's kind of our responsibility and our passion. It becomes of our informed passion, kind of, in a way. So, I composed that program based on the best, and I was very lucky to have great folk singers in that Belarus collection, and great storytellers, people who came from, say, Western Belarus, because Belarus, like Ukraine, was divided into the Polish West and the Soviet East during the interwar period, between the 2 world wars. And people were telling completely different stories, of course, naturally, and singing wonderful, different, and sometimes jarring repertoire. From Zionist songs and Bundist songs, especially Zionist songs in Yiddish. That kind of was the most interesting part. And communist propaganda songs in the eastern part about Lenin, Stalin's Red Army, and all that stuff. And just putting it together into one storyline, in a storyline in one generation that was split by different by the border, different, etc. So that was quite amazing, and I was very fortunate to put it together with the help of Zalman Mlotek and Brian Wasserman, who helped me at the Yiddish Theater, Volksbühne, and they produced it. We did with my band and Michael Alpert. The listeners of Radio and Others probably know that name, but for those who don't know, Michael Alpert is a renowned Yiddish ethnographer, performer, dancer, a mentor to many current generation Yiddish performers, klezmer performers. So, and he lived in New York at the time. So we toured a bit with that program. So again, I arrived at the Fortunoff Video Archive project with that experience of having put together a kind of ethnographic multimedia theater kind of production.
You said Michael Alpert. It's funny that you mentioned that because there's another connection, right? Because Michael Alpert was one of the interviewers in one of the testimonies that really pulled out a considerable amount of musical information and content from one of the testimonies. So there's another connection that brings the two of you together with the Fortunoff Video Archive.
Yeah, he's very much also sort of the perfect, at least for the point of view of like having been a guy who's a baby boomer from California. He somehow is also an old Jew from Eastern Europe, but like all of Eastern Europe at once somehow. That's what's sort of amazing about him. Yeah, so it's like, wow, you've been doing this now, you're 3 albums in. That is a really beautiful commitment to a project because, especially I know this is not a grant funded project. I mean, maybe it is, but it's something that's within the archives like work. It's not a collaboration between you two. It's within a program, which is good because a lot of grant funded things that I see or have been a part of, let's say it's a one and done kind of thing. And you're like, well, I've got big plans for this, and then you realize, wow, it took an awful lot of work to get that done once and now the money's gone. Or you have to figure out something else.
Yeah.
But this is just like, it's really beautiful to see this as a longer term commitment. And so was that your goal at the outset, or was it sort of like, oh my God, we're just at the tip of the iceberg, we have to keep doing this?
Well, that goes back to what Zisl was sort of saying, that he has to do something. He had this sort of innate internal motivation to do something, a choivis, like he had debts, he had some kind of need to use this material and do something with it and bring it out to a broader audience. And I think that's exactly the same way I felt and feel with this, about this collection, is that the worst thing I can imagine is this collection of 4,500 testimonies sitting on a shelf or digital storage somewhere and not being used, not being listened to. The survivors who gave us these testimonies they did so at quite considerable emotional cost. This is not
right.
easy
right.
emotional work to talk about the most traumatic experiences of your life, right? And to have it recorded on videotape like this. So I do feel an obligation to the survivors to do something meaningful with their materials. And so, yeah, it wasn't approached as a kind of project or a grant project, one and done. It's part of a larger kind of a larger plan where it's I feel every single survivor testimony in the collection should have its day in the sun, its attention, right, where attention given to it. And so this was just one part of a sort of multifaceted plan to do that, right? And so as long as there were songs and poetry recounted in these testimonies that haven't been examined and presented, I think there's room for this to continue. But it was very organic, Dan. Like it kept growing. Like Zisl was invited to perform at a conference. He performed these first songs by Lubov. We were all blown away and moved and said we have to do more. So he recorded those songs, and then we said, well, there are like 150 songs that we know of through the cataloging that we've done over the years. We can locate the songs and we can listen to the songs, and so we know there's more. So let's just keep going. And so that's when we invited Zisl as a sort of musician in residence to start digging through the collection and listening to some of these songs, and then creating these albums one after another around different, I wouldn't say necessarily different themes, but Zisl can talk more about how he chose which songs himself. But the point is, yeah, it just grew organically, and it seems like it's finite. There's a finite number of songs and poems recounted in these testimonies, but we have not reached the end.
obviously that would be an incredibly perfect segue to talking about how you get the songs and how you put the stuff together. And we will do that in a second. But I just want to take like a little meta step for a second and just talk about the experience of engaging with personal histories rather than a written history or some kind of generalized history, whether you call it history is written by the winners or whatever, these kind of like big picture histories that are usually how we encounter even something like the Holocaust, that we encounter as, especially American Jews of a certain age and the way that we were educated in that. And just like how amazing it is, to really swim in the unending ocean of history when you look at it from the point of view of individual people. It's like, Zisl, you're saying, you're on one side of the border, you got one set of songs, you got another side of the border, another set of songs. How far is that geographic distance in our collapsed, unregionalized world? You can't even imagine how few miles it takes to change someone's perspective and experience. And how, especially, I think, like you said, Zisl, as revivalists, or people who are interested in bringing the past into a present in a very active way as opposed to a very passive way. There's no one point of view. It's about presenting many points of view to kind of create an aggregate experience of kind of being a part of something, being a part of a people, being part of a community, being part of a culture. And I think that in itself seems very natural to even me as a sort of non-ethnographic klezmer musician. It just seems like what we've always done and what we've always had to do with our own Yiddish land music and world.
Right. Well, again, I must point out a commonality in methodology, in the method and that approach to interviewing people that Nina Stepanska and I used in our research, and that the Fortunoff archive used as guidelines. And I was amazed to see that this is, there's that commonality, common ground, which is basically let people speak out, let people really tell their entire story of their life, rather than, yes, you have to direct them with certain questions that you prepare ahead of time, but also in a bit go with the flow and let them tell their story. And this is how, on the one hand, in our Belarusian body of interviews, we have a lot of naturally, Holocaust testimonies, and and on the other hand, in the Fortunoff Video Archive, there are a lot of songs and poetry and other life material, because, and that's, I think, is very important to see those people's lives rather than death, which is it's written all over the place, because that's, Holocaust is a terrible event of annihilation of Jewish people and Roma people and other people as well. It's terrible, but people were living their lives. And so we kind of arrive, and you said it, we'll talk about it in a second, but then you arrive at a very jarring question. How do you present those songs from the Holocaust archive in something that is, again, has the entertainment plastered all over the place, because presenting songs in a concert is entertainment. That's right. What it is, definition. How do you ethically marry those two and yet stay true to yourself as an artist, as a researcher, etc., etc.?
Viene proscriterio che stavre tira povita fila che strehu na min panercho protos manerche de ohagu to bono matiu Daniel maze viangorio che cani fassaria.
So true. I mean, I would say that methodology rings pretty true for how I run these interviews as well. But, I think that, let's get into it. So, okay, Stephen, you said that maybe even before you two had linked up, you had done some cataloging of interviews. And so you'd probably have, video number 4100 has songs in it, right? Like, so you had done some of that cataloging. So, what was the process first of finding the songs in the first place and then going through them And then let's start with like the first album, or whatever, wherever you want to go, but choosing repertoire to put together in this kind of like, performance project that needed a lot of thought. I don't think it's terribly outside of our wheelhouse, but it takes work, and that's sort of what you're saying. And so how do you get to the songs? And then Zisl next we can talk about how the songs become performable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I also, though, you brought up a whole bunch of points before we went there that were just also like amazing. And I don't know if we have all the time to talk about them all, but I mean, one of the things you brought up was just how to swimming in this sea of audiovisual testimony, right? These sources that are, like you said, it's not top down history, it's bottom up history, right? It's history told to us. It's memory, right? It's the memory of individuals recounted to us, the common people, right? And through the memories that they share with us, we can sort of reconstruct historical events that, in many cases, are not documented anywhere else, right? And that also is true for songs and poetry, right? And like we said with Lubov, I don't think these songs are documented anywhere else. And moreover, to the point, there are, yes, lots of song collections, written collections of songs from, in particular, the Holocaust period, from the immediate post-war period, the work of Shmerka Kaczerginski and lots of others who collected these songs during the war. But many of those written texts don't include, not all of them, don't include sort of notation or melody or any information. They often are just lyrics, right? And so one of the things that I really found remarkable about these audiovisual testimonies is here's a moment in time where someone is not only reading you the lyrics of a song, they are singing the song, they are performing the song from their memory for you, right? They're performing a song, they're singing the melody, you have it all, it's all captured in one place. And this can't be done in a written document in the same way. It can only be done in an audiovisual document. And so I really think this project, in a way, demonstrates the unique strength and value of a video testimony, which I'll also note, as you sort of were, referring to, is the fact that audiovisual testimony and video testimony in particular has not always been seen as a sort of valuable source, right? We have to remember that it's
wow.
We didn't start recording testimony until 1979, which we're the first, right? We're the first to do this in any sustained way. But really, the work of the Fortunoff Video Archive and its establishment at Yale University gave a kind of, I would argue, at least a kind of yichus to this type of source and support to this source as a source worthy of attention, right? For a long time, we think of historiography of the Holocaust, a lot of the earlier works were written without the testimony of survivors, right? It was written using German sources and other sources that were somehow deemed more reliable than the fallible memory of the victims. But one of the things that's incredible about the work of this collection, and of course many of the early survivor historians, both during the war and after the war, is this emphasis on the value of the voices of the victims, the victimized, and the survivors, the witnesses, and that they are the only ones who can really tell us what it felt like to be there and to experience the Holocaust, or the events we call the Holocaust. And so, and I think the other thing is, one other point you made about this sea is that, it is a sea, but one of the things that's great about thinking about these testimonies is that they're individual life stories, and it helps break down the kind of abstractions that we're confronted with all the time, right? We're confronted with this number of 6 million, and how can one even begin to understand a number so vast? It just becomes an abstraction. Whereas if you start working with testimonies and thinking about these individual lives one at a time, it really it breaks down that abstractions into things that you can understand, like people with families and names and siblings who no longer are there, or like Lubov, fellow prisoners who sang a song together, and those fellow singers are no longer alive, right? And she's left alone. So it helps us, I think, innately to understand the scope and the scale of this tragedy.
Yeah, And two quick points, and then let's really get into those songs. But one, I think that, just thinking about the act of performing music, the act of singing together and creating music, and how powerful that is as a act of resistance. We love to think of other kinds of acts of resistance as being the one. I mean, like you talked about what's valued or what people think. And also just being in this YouTube world of video content, the idea that people would devalue audio-visual things in any way seems hysterically ridiculous now. But
Yeah, now it's commonplace, but it's hard
the
to
only
imagine
thing.
back in the 70s when we started. It was incredibly innovative to even think about this, and video technology was new.
Right, and I did want to point out that wasn't one of the founders of the archive someone who had worked in broadcast television.
Absolutely, Laurel Vlach was a local television. She's the reason why video. She knew video technology. She worked in television. She said we need to tap and use this technology to gather a sort of new angle of this documentation, because obviously there's many generations of Zommlers and Jewish documentation that was being done before the war, during the war, after the war. It's all related in a kind of continuum, but this was her real major contribution, was thinking about this new technological approach.
Well done. Sounds good. Okay, the songs. We get into the songs and we say, like, how do you proceed from this ocean of like all these different spots? Like, I mean, thankfully you know how to do it, but how do you do it?
Well, first of all, material dictates approach. And you deal with material, and then you see what do I do with that. And sometimes a folk singer is so great, you have to carefully arrange it, orchestrate it and perform and leave it like that. But sometimes it requires an extensive, lengthy, laborious work to just recreate the song when there are a few lines, and you assess it as a really valuable, unique document, a song from this and that ghetto or this and that camp, sung under this or those circumstances, which is extremely valuable and important to convey today in some way, right? But the sources are so scarce that how do you do that?
How?
And then the real game begins, because it's again nice and easy when you Google certain things and they pop up in your search engine, and boom, you're done. Great, I found the information about this, which I had no idea about 5 minutes ago. I find all that amazing. I was very lucky with some of songs like that, I admit, but not so lucky with regard to other songs. I really struck the gold mine with just some other songs, which I was pretty hopeless about. So just to begin again, it's a good opener. It began with Lyubov, because Lyubov is not just a female name. In Russian, it means love. It began with love, which is very symbolic. And this woman who I only saw on the videotape, but that's another challenge, a difference between the people Nina and I interviewed. We could ask them questions in person. I didn't have that chance with all these people. I only deal with the archive, with the recorded material, so I don't have a chance to ask them. There's no second chance. So when my bandmate Joshua Camp and I went to New Haven to perform those two songs that Stephen or Sarah Garibova shared with me. So Stephen mentioned there are two other songs, or maybe Sarah mentioned there are two other songs in her testimony, and here are the time codes, and here is the access, whatever password. So please take a look. And I took a look, and those were not songs; those were pieces of amateur poetry. There's no music for that. What do? Like, do I just recite poetry on the microphone? No. So I took liberty to compose music that was historically relevant, something that you could hear in the 1930s and 40s in, say, the Soviet Ukraine. And there's a word that was the world of tangos, or maybe some cabaret music, early jazz, whatever was in the air, whatever was shared, whatever those people could realistically hear on the radio or in concerts, on theaters, etc. And then we took it from there. So I composed two songs, which were recorded the next fall, or that fall of it was 6 years ago, right? It was in 2018. So that was the first challenge, because if you take liberty to compose music that had never existed, that those survivors never knew, it did not exist. They just so you take a responsibility to truthfully and genuinely, authentically represent that survivor's testimony in music and sound. So no, that's a risk, and that's was risk number one and challenge number one. And then something I mentioned, and it has to be addressed, it has to be spoken about, the ethical challenge, because Stevens, as a somebody who is a director of the archive, who has to deal with the board, with other people who come from completely different side, and who are very honest and who are very earnest about their, and I totally respect their position, but they come from a different side. They questioned the validity of that very project. So how can you even possibly represent that immeasurable suffering and pain in music? How can you convey, how can you relay pain in sound, in musical sound? In this, there's a Russian saying, when the cannons speak, muses stay silent.
Mm.
There is no way. There has to be certain time for reflection, etc. So it's a challenge, but it also needs to be done because music is a powerful tool of connection in society.
Yes.
It's a communicator.
Mm-hmm.
So you, as a musician or composer, performer, whatever it is, you communicate that via music. And the situation of a musical performance is a very unique situation because, especially when people pay for tickets, people come to a concert venue and they expect to hear something. It's like, it's a religious service in a way. I think it was Judith Friedrichi, a wonderful scholar of Jewish music, who pointed out the similarity between Jewish liturgy and theater performance, and the way
Uh-huh.
that Yiddish theater came into being, that it resonated with Jews who hailed from traditional lifestyle, because it was very similar in a way. People came to Yiddish theater as into to the synagogue.
Uh-huh. No, that's great.
So I stood by my position, and Stephen, of course, did too. That's how this project, is still existing. So we have to do it. We
Right.
have to do it, yes, carefully, but also, take a plunge, be bold. If we make a decision, stick to that decision. So that's one big challenge. And yeah, I mean, it is not unique. I mean, and then I had an opportunity, thanks to Stephen, connected me with several people. I discovered there's a whole scholarly field study of trauma, as genocides of various kinds, representation in music.
Okay.
Speaking of, Armenian genocide, or that in Chile, the Pinochet
Yeah.
genocide, and various others. So there's a whole field of academic study that actually studies exactly that thing.
Yeah. I mean, what's the thing that is so funny is that, like, even the Lubov example itself is of people choosing to create music inside of that pain. I mean, it's inside of that suffering. It's literally what they decided to do,
Right. If it's their decision, so we have to respect that and to help them
Exactly.
amplify their voices. That's it.
Exactly, and I would argue that in a case as clear cut as this one with Lubov, it's exactly that, right? So I don't think it's so much of an ethical question of reperforming, because that's what we do with our culture. That's how we transmit pieces of culture from one generation to the next, right?
Yeah.
We don't just play back the archival recordings. We listen to them, we reinterpret them, we revivify them in the present, right? So yeah, I think there are all sorts of ethical questions that can emerge, or choices. Let's say we could have discussions about aesthetic choices that are made that one could agree with or disagree with, but I don't think you can make a very good faith argument that we're crossing some kind of line by
Right.
taking a piece of culture that was purposely shared for us in this form and reinterpreting it or representing it for a different audience that may not ever have come into the archive and listened to Lubov's testimony, right? And for
Right.
me, again, this gets back to the risks versus rewards kind of analysis here. And for me, the risks that we were taking in perhaps beautifying something so terrible um, was outweighed by the value that we received in presenting this history in. And again, Zisl provides an enormous amount of context for each of these songs, historical context, creative context. So we really get to understand what this song is about. And I don't think that. I think that's a service to the history of Lubov and Svenigorодka that it's an enormous contribution that can't be that's best done in this form.
What are some of the other maybe specific informants or video testimonies or specific songs that in researching them had a really profound effect on you as an artist, Zisl?
Well, all of them did. I mean, there's not one out of the 40 songs that we recorded, and 39 of them were published on albums, and one I also composed, but it stayed as just musical kind of decoration for the video series that we did, and also it's downloadable on Bandcamp. So that's one fight, sort of, that we aesthetic fight kind of that we had with Steven. So out of those 40 pieces, every single song it was my informed choice, and that's why it hit me in its own way. And I can talk about each of them. We probably take many hours, but I obviously have to make some choices.
Yeah, pick a couple.
And it is, like Steven said, it is always a context. It's always a story. I was prepared. I was arriving in this project. So what if I hear something like, well, way overdone, like, I don't know, Tumbalalaika, some staple of the staples, Hava Nagila, like whatever the context is. Do I choose to record it? I don't know. I mean, probably not. Probably not Tumbalalaika, and not. And unless it's really unique. We have to see the exact case, and maybe some unique words, and maybe some unique arrangement, and maybe some truly unique story that carries that song. And I will give you an example of a non-Jewish song, of a French Boy Scout song that was first published in 1936 in some French song collection, Une fleur au chapeau, a flower on the hat.
Yeah.
And I had no idea whatever the hell that was, and so there was very little information in any sources other than what I just said. But the story was just astonishing. There was a story of a family of Polish Jewish transplants, migrants to France, to Paris, who ran away from those emerging, Hitler Jugend boys in the streets of Poznań. They were migrants within Poland. They hailed from Galicia to Poznań. And the father was a kind of prolific, I think it was a teacher, and so he migrated to a more of urban center, which Poznań was at the time. And then they were terrified by that violence unfolding in the streets of Poznań, so they moved to Paris. And then the France occupation happened in 1940. And so the parents were taken away to a concentration camp, and the children which were early preteen. One was a preteen or still a young boy. One was an early teenage boy. They were left there alone with some of their friends. Some, as they said, some Jewish, some half Jewish, some non, and they were surviving on their own. So their friends just got them the Vichy Pétain insignia to put on their uniform. So basically to escape, to escape under the nose of the Nazis, of the Germans. So they were seeing those Jewish families who were transported to Auschwitz or to concentration camp from that same train station in Paris. And they pretended that they were French boys going to a summer camp.
Dans les soleils et sous l'orage, peut-être bien que vous pensez que nous avons bien du courage pour ainsi nous harasser à courir le long de routes veut ce que c'est, vous n'aurez jamais sans doute une fleur au chapeau, à la bouche une chanson, un cœur joyeux et sincère, et c'est tout ce qu'il faut à nos filles et garçons pour aller au bout de la terre.
You can only imagine how mortified, how terrified they were doing that, seeing all this, understanding what was going on. And they succeeded. They were still ended up in the occupied territory, but effectively they survived the war. So that's why we recorded that song, not with all the verses, everything they sang. So that's sometimes that's the story. And sometimes there's the songs that were composed in ghetto. Sometimes these are not the songs. Sometimes these are couplets of like the Bona singers. And I had to do my research again. There was so little, so scarce information. Who are these Bona singers? There was the two women and two survivors. So both gave testimonies in Hebrew. Both were in Israel, but one recounted that song, those Bona couplets in Polish, and the other in Yiddish. So both came from Warsaw Ghetto. So
wow.
apparently, and I only was able to Google, because I wasn't able to find any scholar, anybody who could share this information with me. So it was only one article in Hebrew and one article in Polish online that I discovered. Those were people who were basically starving to death, and they went crazy. And they went in the streets of Warsaw Ghetto, just yelling those rhyme verses, asking for bonas. Bonas were food vouchers.
Oh wow!
And give away a bona was a euphemism for death, for dying.
Okay.
So that was something that I had really hard time putting together in a musical composition. How do you make a musical composition out of that?
Right.
But also I felt strongly compelled to do that. So I found a way. I incorporated some of the Warsaw Ghetto music that was performed as a historical fact in the streets of Warsaw Ghetto. So I decided to reconstruct the soundscape of the Warsaw Ghetto, incorporating those Bona couplets and other music of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Pinkier stara cholera wszystkie body zabiera, ale gleich.
People have no idea when they walk around every day and think about what role art or creativity has in their lives, like what it actually means. I mean, you're talking about people who are at the very edge of survival, and they come up with something that people remember as art, basically, as their expression of their desperation. And it's such a shame. I mean, yeah, it's such a shame that we devalue this and don't realize how crazy important all this stuff is, but sometimes that's all you can do, right, Zisl? I mean, thankfully we're in sort of like, I don't know, a musical moment, or have been for a long time, where it's okay to use sounds from every era that we have access to, right? So sometimes, like you said, you can't even make a song out of it. You just have to create a musical setting for it. And this goes back to what you were saying about, the power and the conundrums of performance, of performing these things, because those people in the ghetto were performing them it's just as much a performance, but it's a very, very different everything. And it's, like you said, the performance in a concert setting is, somehow inherently entertainment. But I think this, the phrase ugly beauty, which is a tune by Thelonious Monk that just comes up in my mind all the time and just now. And I was thinking about how we can take a broader picture of beauty. I mean, if you think of beauty as some kind of like pleasing aesthetic experience, fine. But if you think about it in this case, it's about like unvarnished humanity,
Well, I think it brings us to the original meaning of beauty in Judaism, where Tiferet never meant an aesthetic beauty. When the expression Tiferet Israel, that's nothing about being pretty or using makeup, and that's why the contemporary Jewish culture and the new Israeli culture had a kind of had to make up a word, something like yafut or something for beauty, because it never traditionally existed as a category in Jewish thought.
Really?
Because of different meaning of beauty. And
it's something more like what we're saying.
Say it again?
It's like what we're saying. It's like this other kind of thing. That's great.
Well, also there's a number of different things that are happening in these performances too, right? So yeah, we can discuss questions of aesthetics or beauty or pain, but there's also, and Zisl said something about the fact that music is a form of entertainment, and we can't deny that. But I cringe a little bit whenever I hear that term related to the testimonies from this collection. I really see it as a sort of form of education. And if you've ever gone to any of the concerts that Zisl has performed in related to songs from testimonies, it's always an essential part of every concert to include the excerpts, screenings of the excerpts of the original testimonies along with the songs. So and so it becomes doubly so this memorial act. In bringing the voices of the survivors into this space themselves, not just the reinterpretation of their song, but them singing themselves, also with a great deal of context about who these people are, and the fact that they had lives before the Holocaust, during and after the Holocaust, right? And one of the things I like about this project is that some of the songs that Zisl has picked out and brought out underscore that these are human beings with full lives, and that they weren't born in Auschwitz or Mauthausen. They were born in towns, and they had lives before the war. And some of the songs are songs from the interwar period that show a kind of sometimes troubled, but certainly an interaction between Jewish and non-Jewish cultures, right? That these people lived in a world that has kind of ceased to exist, right? And so listening to these songs, especially the interwar period songs, really help us to sort of flesh out this world that has disappeared, right? And and so it's educational in my mind before anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, even I was talking to somebody who had been at one of your concerts, and they brought that very like the context to the concerts. And it's also so funny because I remember, all my stage banter is basically just lesson bullet points on just trying to make it funny sometimes in my own klezmer concerts. And someone was once like, "Why are you trying to teach people things during your performances?" I'm like, man, we have to. No one understands anything about what really was there. Okay, so this is like the stuff that you've been swimming in, Zisl, with these songs, with trying to figure out what they've done, and working together with Steven and all in all these different ways. I would love for you to talk about the awesome contributions of your band members and the ensemble that you put together, because going back to this idea about that you're both into languages and that this archive has so many languages in it, you're like, well, we're in this. My hope for Radiant Others is to do a whole bunch of episodes on different artists who have done different things in archives. And I have to say, just to start us off, our dear friend Sasha Lurie is a part of many of them. And so it's just this, I was thinking about starting it from the language point of view. And we already talked about French and Polish and Yiddish and Hebrew and English, I'm assuming, at some point. And it's like, wow, okay. Yeah, so you got this awesome band on these records too, and they're bringing everything to life as well. Like, yeah, tell us about them and how awesome it is to work with all these awesome people.
Absolutely. It's my great pleasure to talk about the people I'm working with. So, as I said, we started with Joshua Camp, who's my bandmate from Litvakus band, and in fact, we did a number of performances with the Yiddish Theater, with the Volksbühne. So that's who I began with. But then when Stephen, suggested that we go and record some of that material, Sasha kind of naturally came to my mind, and I had known her from my past life, or her past life too, when we met in Riga and possibly even in Moscow and some Jewish festivals and just hanging out. So when we're much younger, uh, and it was, I think, it was the right move because Sasha is a very versatile singer with immense knowledge and experience in interpreting musical cultures, and a great deal of flexibility and versatility. And I definitely, I stand by that statement till now. It was the right move, right choice, and I'm happy that she agreed to do that. And in fact, we've done several other projects with her before that. We recorded this project with which I still, it's my other debt to the world, called Goyfriend. So we toured with that project, which is exactly about those politically incorrect songs of the Jews about their neighbors and the Slavs and Baltic people about their Jewish neighbors. 11 compositions. So that also involved multiple languages and uneasy material that had to be worked on. So that kind of all built up to this Fortunoff Video Archive project. But not all of those songs came easy to us. And yes, Sasha sings a lot in Yiddish and in Russian, but she doesn't sing, for example, in Polish. I mean, now she does, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And Ladino and Greek.
And Ladino and Greek. Well, so but Polish, out of all these languages, I mean, we were very lucky in this our situation because it's my second language. I grew up with Polish and a very kind of unique situation because my father taught me Polish and he learned it as a teenager himself, behind Iron Curtain and all that. So it was kind of a unique situation. But phonetically, Polish is difficult. If you
Uh-huh.
didn't grow up with Polish, it's very hard to pronounce all that. So, just to give it away, a little secret, we would do a draft recording of any given song in Polish. There are a lot of songs in Polish. Some of them are openly anti-Semitic, by the way, which brought some concern to Stephen. Like, are we creating some top 10, hit list for the present day anti-Semites out there? So there would be.
You'd almost want to give them credit for doing actual language research. It's like they'd have to learn a lot. They'd have to step away from their easy talking points and all that nonsense and actually do some hard work for a change. So but we can leave them alone.
Right, but then we would go overdub with Sasha. When we're doing the final version of all this, like going line by line. It's hard to make it actually legitimate pronunciation and make it clean. And then there are other languages, yeah, Greek and Czech, and we had to consult. We had to find other people to help us to record, and so yeah. So
Super deep.
that's language aspect, and then there's stylistic aspect to portray young children, to portray people of different ages, basically.
Yeah.
Portray that starving person in the Warsaw Ghetto. Portray that entertainer. When speaking of entertainment, there was entertainment in labor camps and
Sure.
concentration camps. People were entertaining each other to just mentally survive, psychologically survive that situation. So that's when Sasha's versatility and flexibility and vocal also, and not just just whatever she has in her, how do you say it, arsenal, translates into the vocal vocabulary that
Right.
she can create all these different characters. And that's again when we struck gold with her, really.
Well, yeah, I feel that way about working with her too.
Right.
And how brave of her. Like we went on a tour where we played, I think, 5 shows in different cities in Europe. And so she's singing, and she played a show in Warsaw. She's played shows in Lublin and singing these Polish songs for a Polish audience, right? Live.
That was the most terrifying experience for her, not being a Polish speaker, the first time Polish singer even.
Wow.
Like, what kind of chutzpah do you have to go and perform in front of Polish audiences in Poland?
Yeah.
Sehr chutzpahdik.
I gave her also, Sasha, you're good. Like, okay, let's go over that, but you're good, and correct her if needed. But she was fine. She did it.
Yeah, she's great. I just think it's so interesting that, because it reminds me of, funny enough, it reminds me of my own album, Radiant Others, that I named and started at the same time as I started this podcast. And I had to record a lot of those parts line by line because I was trying to be this trombone player playing klezmer melodies, and I couldn't do it live, actually. So we would do this thing, and I'd have to go re-record as an instrumentalist too. And then what's great is that, you grow into it, and then you can, and then
fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to, and I stand by that recording, and I'm much more happy that I can actually do it live now, and I think it's probably the same thing, but it's not just this language thing, it's like the act of performance, but at the same time, you could say, well, we should do something that, you could find somebody who has perfect pronunciation or could play the trombone parts, could play all of the notes and learn how to breathe in the right places, but the thing is that we are carrying something alongside all of that. Our experience, or her or your or my experience in Jewish music.
That's exactly right.
And that is necessary. So people need to have the grace, or not, because we're actually great performers, to accept those things, because it's the other stuff that's actually important. That these are just the carriers for this larger thing. And I think that that's what's so interesting about this collaboration and this project, is that, you start talking about these different characters, and immediately, of course, I think, well, yeah, because now that you're, one of the things you've become in your life as a New York musician is a theater guy and a theater, music director, composer, all these things. And so you're not just thinking like, how do you play that? You're not just an instrumentalist. You're not even just a composer. You're like thinking about these things in these big ways, and how perfect, but also how challenging. Like you said, I actually had written down, I said, it seems like there's more of a sense of capital R responsibility in a project like this than there is in sort of just like, oh, let's make an album of our fun material, and we've spoken to that. I don't need to ask for more of it. We've spoken to it so much, but it's okay, because we're the right people to do this. And in a sense, we're not the only people. There's not some kind of like, essential thing.
I mean, none of the other musicians are on this call right now, so it's sort of unfair to speak on their behalf. But as someone who's been able, as a sort of fly on the wall, to observe them when they're performing these pieces, for instance, on the tour and whatnot, like it's pretty clear to me that their commitment to this material, the responsibility, as you said, is they feel it strongly. And I've heard Sasha say many times just how hard it is to sing these songs, not necessarily because of the language, the difficulties of reproducing a fluent Polish in a musical setting like this, but the subject matter, the topic, singing these words, bringing these words going through your vocal cords and being reproduced at times, as difficult as the lyrics are, it's very hard for them to perform these works. So I have a lot of respect for them. And I think that's also another reason why, you asked earlier about the longevity of this project. We've got, done 3 albums so far. We've really made it, I like to think of it as a kind of effort, like a family effort, right? Like there really hasn't been a performance of these songs without all of the key members of the band, right? 2 of them, Sasha and Craig living in Berlin and everybody else living in the New York area, does not make the performance of this work very simple, right? If we've
Sure.
all kind of a tacit agreement that we're doing this together and we're committed to each other, and they're the same performers on each album, and all the performance has been done as a group at enormous sort of both financial cost but also logistical difficulty, right? But it's important because I think this type of project does take a certain commitment and responsibility, like you said.
Growing into it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, we have to throw ourselves in the deep end with this stuff, because there's no shallow end often. with Yiddish culture and what we've gone through as a people, the shallow end, is gone. Like the part where you gradually get deeper and deeper in the water. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to find the deep water, but then that's all there is. You have to dive in, right?
Exactly, and it's just forget Jewish music. It's not just about the language. It's just about. You're right. I mean, it's about when you're singing like a Polish song for the Polish audiences. You're not just saying Polish words or singing Polish words. You're conveying the story. So it's much more than that. And as a band, and I have to credit the entire band, which I will in a second. Stephen is correct. We spend an enormous amount of time just going into each story and into each testimony, into each character and persona of each survivor or witness to the Holocaust that we work with. We have to really understand what we're doing. Otherwise we don't have right to do it. And sometimes there's challenges with vocabulary. So some of those things are klezmer, Yiddish, etc. So that kind of, to someone like myself, it's kind of home base. So that's easy. Sure, let's do that. Or like to make a musical form, if there are like 5 verses in a song, so I bring just outside material to it. I don't know, as a musical break, as a dance break, whatever, if it's appropriate. So from Beregovsky collection, from this and that, whatever it is. So we kind of, we know how to play a Bulgar. Fine, let's do that, or mitzvah tans. But sometimes what immensely helps that each of us hails from different musical backgrounds, and that really helps with different things. So our bass player Dmitry Ishenko is an amazing jazz bass player, but also has a classical training, also plays musical theater, also like he's done hundreds of different projects and maybe hundreds of albums that he recorded, also with some big wigs and jazz, but
oh yeah,
what have you, and that versatility, but also that kind of his boldness and precision. Like I got this compliment from the sound engineer for Dmitry. Like there's not a wrong note that he ever played. Everything is right on the spot. Not like intonation, rhythm, everything like is there, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Like and Joshua Camp, he's done a lot of Appalachian music now, a lot of cumbia and Mexican music, and South American music, and again, Josh's expertise as a music producer and composer has done a fair share of commercial music, advertisements. So he has a vast expertise and in other things that I don't have experiences, and that comes really handy and helpful in doing that. No, there's a Cielito Lindo in one of the songs that was done in Poland. There was very pan-European songs that was imported from Mexico, supposedly Spain, Mexico, into Europe, and sung in German, in Polish, and then there was a pre-war and wartime version in Polish, sung unrelated directly to the Holocaust, but one of the survivors sang it as caroling around to get handout in the courtyards of Warsaw. And so Josh's experience in Latin music and Mexican music came in really handy to recreate that kind of vibe there, kind of bring in that. And then we have Craig Udelman on the violin and the string instruments, who has, again, is a klezmer player, but also as an Americana player, and a lot of his sensibilities and sensitivities in music also help us tremendously in a way. So we all, and I come from a classical background, but also I dived into klezmer early on and other musics. We all bring something to the table, and it's about conversations that we're having behind the scenes and on stage. And that is extremely helpful for this kind of project.
I think it's great that you're able to share some of that publicly, and that's one of the reasons why I even do this podcast, is so we can share this kind of experience, because I think people need to know just how much expertise and experience just making an album takes. Just doing this stuff justice. It's not a little. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's sometimes it's shocking to me, because even though I'm in the process of doing it. All the people that you mention are, people who I've, been in orbits with close and far. And it's just, oh, right. We're all really amazing,
I can second that as someone who's a non-professional, the only non-professional musician in this podcast, and watching from the sidelines and seeing this ensemble perform again and again. It is truly shocking to me how incredible these musicians are. I mean, yes, it is a lot of work to do these albums and to play these songs, but I have to say they make it make it look effortless.
Yeah.
Just the versatility and world-class musicians doing this work.
This is the bar that I want people to understand. This is what it takes to be able to respectfully remember these songs and bring them into the present, because we talked about this idea of this, a million individual points making up a million individual stories and lives, which are themselves deep and multifaceted, that make up the actual experience of human history. And one of the things that is remarkable about human beings, and especially musicians, is that you can somehow, through an unbelievable amount of hard work and an unbelievable amount of knowledge seeking and knowledge assimilating, actually give those individual points, each of which is his own world, justice. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. Like, I believe in that. Whew.
Amen.
When you familiarize yourself with this project, the first thing, if you take an album or look at the website, is a visual representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to mention our artist of this project, Yulia Ruditskaya, who is my expat. She's also from Minsk, and she also, like myself, lives in Brooklyn. And she's a world-famous animation artist, and educator, etc. And so I recommended her as an artist for this project, but it was not just, hey, let me bring in my buddy into this. I had never met her in person before that, believe it or not. Although she went to school with my sister, I had never met her before in Minsk. And Yulia was also famous because she made her, she committed to making those animations and other artwork following the crackdown in Belarus after the presidential election of 2020. And that's why she and myself, we're kind of being wary of traveling to Belarus these days. It's
a shame.
It's kind of risky, but she has this kind of sharp sensitivity and sensibility of all that situation of, you know what I mean. And she really did justice to that, just in terms of graphic representation of doing covers. And then I convinced Steven to commission Yulia to do an animation to one of the songs, The Waltz. One of the songs that I wrote music for, it was based on the Aleph Lutzky's Yiddish poem. Aleph Lutzky was an immigrant to New York. He worked for the Vorwärts and other Yiddish publications, but his songs made it to the Lodz ghetto, and he was sung during the dance exercise when the children danced in the ghetto. And woman who, Jean B., her story was also jarring. I mean, she moved to mandatory Palestine. She graduated from Hebrew University, and then she came to visit her family. Imagine that, in Lodz in 1939. She got locked up, and the Nazis came in, and she got in the ghetto, but she survived that. Can you imagine?
No.
And she remembered that. Yeah, no, it's impossible, really. No, it's beyond comprehension. But she remembered that tune. And then later I discovered that Aleph Lutzky actually was did mellow declamation of his own poems. There are recordings of actually Lutzky's he's a ein, zwei, drei, ein, zwei, drei. So he kind of semi-sings. I was not aware of that, but I wrote music to that. And then Yulia did an animation that already did a whole, round of film festivals, etc. So that exposed that, get some exposure to this project worldwide to, again, audience who would never get familiarized with this material otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's what stuff is supposed to be. It's a doorway. It's an opening of a doorway that brings you, sometimes directly to something like the actual video recordings of the archive, but also this open doorway out from there, in all these ways that you can expect and not expect. So I actually think that's a good place to segue sort of as we head towards wrapping up. But thinking about, we've talked about all these possible uses of the archive itself, of this project, of, organic growth and also incredibly intentional efforts. So, I'd love to hear from each of you hopes and dreams, but also, I'd say you can be as selfish about it or as sort of selfless about it as you want, in terms of both the archive and this project. But Stephen, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously this isn't the end. We just released the third volume this year, and we're trying to do as much as we can to promote the third volume. I got a series of concerts coming up. Hopefully, and Zisl can talk a little bit about the ones that are on the schedule, but hopefully there'll be more. So yeah, certainly not the end. Certainly would like to see the project continue, whether that means a fourth volume. Zisl has noted there's still a large amount of material left that hasn't been recorded or researched that could still potentially be a fourth volume. There's also some interest in producing additional video web series based on the project. So we had if you go to the website, the Fortunoff Video Archive website, you'll see that there's a video series that we created for the first volume, which features not only the songs but performances, the original testimonies, and then interpretations or additional sort of commentary by a scholar who's chosen to particularly, due to their expertise, to discuss that particular song in context. And so that's something we'd love to do for volume 2 and volume 3. Zisl's also talked about producing, sheet music for the volume so that other people could perform the works. And I wouldn't say it's just the beginning, but we are very intent on seeing it continue. So if resources, of course, it's all related to both financial and human resources about how much one can actually do. I mean, if we had endless amounts of money, I mean, I would be very happy to see this work performed every year in a series of concerts in Europe, in the United States. We can't do that right now, but certainly there will be more such concert series in the future.
And for the archive itself, is that something that's available to the public and people could, people can try to find their own way through it?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the Songs from Testimonies project, there's all the first 2 volumes that's all online, and that includes excerpts from the testimonies and all the material that Zisl put together for the liner notes, and the video series is there with the commentary by the scholars. So that's all openly available. And the third volume will eventually be on our website as well. It's just for this first initial year, it's sort of embargoed while we try and get it out to the world, and it's distributed through internationally through distribution. But yeah, the archive itself there are certain edited programs available on our website. So there are about a dozen edited programs. If you want to watch unedited testimony, you have to do research at one of our 200 access sites around the world. We have access sites at institutions of higher learning, museums, various research centers. So that's where the researchers gain access to the unedited materials. And if there's anyone who, of course, is listening to the podcast is interested, they can always shoot me an email, and I'm happy to give them some information about how to do that. But the list of access sites on our website, and it's, like I said, it's over 200 in 30 different countries at this point. So it's very accessible, but it's not openly available online. The unedited materials are not openly available online.
All right, Zisl, tell us, what do you want to see happen? And you could even take it like, just what is it like to be working, what are the joys and what could you want to be working with archives, like the desire of as an artist?
Well, like with many other musical projects, and all musicians can totally relate to that, laying tracks in studio or even completing the mixing and mastering of an album is just the beginning of the work. Because you have to do all the legwork to publicize it. You have to reach out to your audience. Musicians in our audience who are listening to this now can certainly understand that I'm not, saying something new. But non-musicians have to really understand that it's just the beginning of the path. That's how, so it is hard because it's not, commercial music. It's the furthest first from commercial music. It is the most diverse project I've ever worked on in terms of material, language. Also, it's very challenging because it might not be relevant in terms of style for the present day listener who's just out of the blue, any random listener from the street. Why would they listen to all these tangos and marches and Freilachs? I don't know, music from 100 years ago. So you have to make it accessible again without compromising authenticity and genuinity towards this material. So how do you make it? And to make an outreach effort so you have to find places, venues, organizations, individuals. So that's all that legwork you have to do.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a chore or unpleasant. It's just part of that work. It's what it is. As Steven has mentioned, I'm hoping that there will be funds eventually to keep recording those songs. There's enough material, and there are already challenges down that way. I'm still looking for specialists, say, in Slovak military history, because one of the songs, there's an incomplete song of a Slovak military unit where some Jewish soldiers fought during World War II, and it has a very interesting story to it. I'm very interested to record it. It's just not sufficient material yet to record that song. I hope there will be, but I'm also prepared to not have that material, not record that song. I'll be very upset, but that might be one of the outcomes, to record it or not record it. Each song is a story. So my ambition and my hope is to continue that work and to travel with this project. We have some performances that are scheduled. First of all, we've done already a fair share of performances in the United States, remotely. I guess I think remotely in Canada, all over Europe, remotely and in person. It was actually the first post-pandemic tour that we did, and I got sick with COVID right before that. I had to buy an additional whatever, replace my ticket, which was was on the nerves, on the budget, on the everything was last minute. So it was a good decision for me to give some ample time before the tour, before we started in Munich, and then move on in Germany, and then move on. So that allowed me, back in the time, 2020, we're talking May 2022, when we have to actually show the papers.
That was hard. It was hard back then.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that a lot of this project happened during the pandemic, right?
That's really true.
And for us, I mean, we did online concerts. We had to learn how to do. We had to learn how to do all of that, and for me, that was also a pretty special part of this project. Is that I felt like, oh my God, everything's shutting down. These artists have no place to play, and so to a certain extent, it also felt like, okay, we got to keep this going remotely, because it's a lifeline for musicians who don't have regular venues to play at.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Well, so that's one kind of hardship down the road, and obviously, we were very lucky that we recorded second volume right before the shutdown, the lockdown in January of 2020. So, oh great, we had that material, and then oh shoot, we got one song wrong. Like we deciphered. It was my response, not It's my fault. I mean, I take responsibility. I wrongly transcribed one Yiddish song. Some of them were very challenging. With a lot of lingo, a lot of slang. It's not just no general understanding of Yiddish, which I teach, language I teach, but it can boil down to very specific, say, camp jargon that you have to understand. That was the case.
Sure.
And then we that's what it was. And then we were separated. Sasha was in Berlin and we were in New York, so they have to hire a studio and go in to match the microphone to recreate that, That was a sort of feat. So I hope that we won't have anything down the line, anything like that. But so my hope that we will continue that. But kind of looking at the bigger picture, that we can. I hope, again, my ambition, that we'll complete that work of recording of all these songs from Fortunoff Video Archive, and to put them out into the world. We have already done a project with a similar, our sister project, Yiddish Glory, with Anna Sternsches.
Sure.
She was there in London, but so she works with Psoy Korolenko here in the United States and Canada and the United States. But then she had Alice Zavadsky in London, who's a wonderful singer, composer, band leader there. And so that was great. That's something that I kind of I'm envisioning as a great outcome for similar sister project, sibling project to meet each other. That's a project that it's a concert that's coming up in Vienna on June 27th.
Great.
I decided, like, Stephen gave me a carte blanche, do whatever you want, fine. I do want to represent Songs from Testimonies, but then there's Traveling the Yiddish Land. Why not have them meet vis-a-vis, face-to-face, and talk to each other, and have people in the audience talk to me about that and to each other, maybe, potentially.
Yeah.
And so we had these two projects talk to each other in a way, Yiddish Glory and Songs from Testimonies, that developed absolutely independently and are in a way different, but in a way very similar.
Agreed.
Same thing with the Boyfriend. Also, Sasha recorded a similar project with a different material with Latvian singers. And in fact, yesterday we did a gig with Ilya Schneeveist, the wonderful accordionist and multi-instrumentalist producer, who was going to mix that project yesterday in a studio in Brooklyn and say, fine, they're releasing it in December. So why don't, when you have released that, and I hopefully will release Boyfriend, why don't we do a double bill and we have those two similar but also different projects talk to each other kind of in a double bill? It's a very fresh idea. You're the first audience, the first human being on earth who hears that after I spoke to Ilya.
Breaking news on the Radiant Others Klezmer podcast. That's right.
Right. That's my train of thought is actually making connections and have people and projects talk to each other and generate other. It's like a Beit Midrash,
Yeah.
It's like meet texts and have them talk to each other and generate other. It's, I think, very Jewish approach.
Of course, we love the dialogue, and I think what's great about it all, it's just more about getting people to understand how deep and how personal and interpersonal and how many different, these are all worlds unto themselves. Each person and each story is important, and that history is made up of people, and we can somehow, through the power of music and performance, kind of remember them and bring out, just encounter in a way that's manageable, not almost, and it shouldn't be totally manageable. It should be almost manageable. An almost manageable way of taking it all in, this impossibly large, humanity. You can take it all in through this medium of art and creativity and human, ingenuity and, like you said, survival, fight, resilience, and all this beautiful thing that we see. And somehow we get to channel all of that all at once, and it can work. It's mind-boggling, but what a joy to be able to do it and to let it pass through you and to have all the knowledge that it takes to be able to make that happen. And what a pleasure it is to talk to both of you and learn more about this project and get to be able to share all this stuff with people and hear about all of what the real work is. So, Zisl and Stephen, thank you very much. Thank you both. This was really great.
Thank you, Dan. Just to wrap up, I wanted to mention that those who are interested, you can visit the songsfromtestimonies.org website, which is a shortcut to the Fortunoff Archives musical project. So it will bring you to Yale University Library page, songsfromtestimonies.org, and the music can be found at zisl.bandcamp.com. All the 3 albums that you can listen to and stream and download and buy LPs. Yes, it was thanks to Steven's idea to make an LP.
Very cool.
And CDs and just a musical download. So that's it. And just come to our concerts, hopefully.
Please. All right. That's beautiful. Thanks, everybody. I loved it. And wonderful.
Thanks for having us on.
That was my conversation with Zisl, Slepovitch, Stephen Naron about songs from Testimonies, music from the Fortunoff video archive. And, like I said, we got into it, I mean, you're dealing with the Holocaust extremely directly, and so what else is there to do but dive in and give it your all, because that's what it requires. Like Zisl said, you can visit songsfromtestimonies.org to get really into it, and of course, listen to the albums. They're available wherever you stream music. There's a lot of work that went into them, and the music is really good. I also want to mention that this summer, started in July, In the First Person, the first large-scale exhibition of footage from the Fortunoff archive, opened at Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and it's open all the way until January 28th of next year. So, you can, if you're in the area, you can go check it out. I actually was just in the area and should have gone and checked it out. So, don't do what I did and go check out this and check out the music, and stay tuned. Zisl Slepovitch has a ton of awesome other stuff that you should also go check out. And in the meantime, please keep listening, keep sharing, support us on Patreon if you are able, and just keep engaging with this vast world of people, this history and present of us, our people. We want you here. We want you involved in the music. We want you involved in the culture. We want you here. So, with that, wish you all well, and good Shabbos.
Nie całoj tyle, te mnie